Tim Cady. I'm a senior meteorologist here with the National Weather Service Houston-Galveston Forecast Office. Also joining us today for this briefing is our senior service hydrologist, Katie Landry-Guyton. So what I'm going to do is give an overview of the weather side of things, and then Katie is going to go into detail on the hydrologic outlook for our area as it pertains to the recent and ongoing river flooding and how that might be affected by this next round of storms we're going to get. So just some changes since our last forecast update. We do continue to expect a flooding threat from this line of storms that is going to develop overnight tonight and persist into the early part of Thursday, with perhaps some storms even developing behind the line later on into the afternoon on Thursday. This is still something that's a bit uncertain right now. That main line of storms, again, going to move through overnight into the early part of tomorrow morning. Since yesterday, the heaviest rainfall threat has shifted further to the south. You can see there on the left is the excessive rainfall outlook from the Weather Prediction Center. And you can see a lot of the area that's along and north of the I-10 corridor is in that moderate risk area. That indicates at least a 40% chance that a point within that area, near 25 miles of point in that area, could experience rainfall that may lead to flash flooding. This threat, of course, is exacerbated by the saturated soils from the storms that moved through the area Sunday into Monday that produced some flooding then as well. It'll be easier for those areas to experience a flash flood as a result of that. In addition to this flooding threat, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail with this just in a bit, but there is also a severe weather threat with this line of storms. Mainly, this is concerning the potential for strong wind gusts, and that would occur early in the morning tomorrow. So that's something we're also monitoring. I'll discuss that further in just a bit. Now, in terms of the rainfall forecast, again, we're expecting this main line of storms to move through overnight into tomorrow morning. This is going to bring heavy rain to a lot of the area, specifically along and north of the I-10 corridor. You can see I've kind of denoted that area on the left there. This is a high-resolution model forecast. It's kind of the best model outlook we have available to us right now. It's a combination of a bunch of different high-resolution models that we use to forecast rainfall. This indicates widespread totals of 2 to 5 inches within that area along and north of the I-10 corridor. Those will be the widespread totals we expect with this line of storms. However, as we saw with the last event and in many flood events in this area, we could see those isolated local higher amounts possible. In this case, we would expect some locations to receive possibly 6 to 9 inches of rain, depending on exactly how the storm set up and how fast they move through the area. In terms of timing, we expect some scattered storms to form out ahead of the line this evening. This could produce some heavy downpours, but I would not expect those to be as widespread. We're expecting the main window for heavy rain approximately 2 a.m. To noon. That's overnight tonight into the early part of tomorrow afternoon. And again, in terms of the severe weather threat, we're mainly concerned with those strong winds. Those strong winds could potentially be moving through the Houston metro during the morning commute, and that's a threat that we're monitoring right now. So as a result of all this, we've issued a flood watch. It's going to be in effect from 10 p.m. tonight through 7 p.m. Thursday evening. Recently, we did add Harris County to this watch. It was previously in effect, and we've decided with a slight southward shift of the potential heavy rain to add Harris County to this watch in addition to all those other counties that were in it previously. I'm going to reiterate again, the flash flood potential is heightened by the rainfall that we just experienced. We have saturated soil, so it won't take quite as much rainfall to result in flash flooding. And of course, runoff from these rains is going to potentially further exacerbate some river flooding along the San Jacinto and Trinity basins that are experiencing that ongoing flooding right now. Katie is going to go into much greater detail in that on her part of the presentation here shortly, so stay tuned for that. And finally, the severe weather risk. This is still, of course, a threat that we're monitoring. The main threat being those strong wind gusts. You can see there on the left is the Storm Prediction Center severe weather outlook. Much of our area is located within that slight risk area for severe weather. The main threat there being those strong wind gusts along the line of storms as it moves through the area, possibly moving through the Houston metro during the morning commute time period. you can't completely rule out isolated tornadoes or some hail, but conditions are less favorable for those hazards. And a few different scenarios on how this could unfold. There's some uncertainty as to how fast the line of storms move through the area, and of course that will impact the exact rainfall amount. And if we see those higher end amounts, but in a scenario where the line's moving through the area a bit faster, that severe weather risk would be greater. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie. We're going to change presenters here really quickly, and she's going to discuss the river flooding outlook with the ongoing flooding, and then how the additional rainfall will impact the current situation.
All right, Tim, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. I can hear you as well, Katie.
Awesome, great. All right, thank you so much. So as Tim alluded to, we're still dealing with a lot of the routed flows from the heavy rainfall that we had earlier part of this week, and then we're also dealing with the additional rainfall. So we just kind of wanted to get a handle on what we're currently expecting and what are some of the potential scenarios. So what I wanted to start off with first off is give you the situation overview. So if you look on the left-hand side, this is what you would see on our new NWPS website. So that's the new hydro page for the Weather Service. You would also see something similar on the old page as well. So the primary concern right now is, of course, still along the Trinity and the San Jacinto. You can see that we do have some isolated action stage forecast along the Brazos as well. So that's something we'll need to keep an eye on, especially where some of that heaviest rain falls. Primarily for this webinar, though, we're going to stay focused on the Trinity and the San Jacinto. So for the Trinity, we're currently experiencing action to major river flooding. That flood wave is working its way downstream. Currently somewhere between Romare and Liberty. Lake Livingston has decreased their releases. They were at 94,300 CFS yesterday, and they have gone down to about 81,300 CFS this morning. We do anticipate that they might have to make additional releases. We do not have an idea of what those releases would be. We're currently holding the 81,000 in the current forecast, though. For the San Jacinto River, currently experiencing action to major river flooding, specifically on the East Fork, still seeing that flood wave near New Caney currently. Lake Conroe is currently releasing around 10,000 CFS. They are anticipating holding near those releases as we kind of await where that heaviest rainfall is going to fall. And then along the Brazos, we're experiencing rises to action stage, but no flooding is currently forecast. The only exception to that is the Navasota River, and I will discuss that at the very end. So for your awareness, these updated river forecasts do reflect those latest latest releases from the reservoirs. So that is accounted for, as well as 48 hours of forecasted rainfall. Okay, so we're going to start off with the Trinity. Looking at upstream of Lake Livingston, we've got the Beedice Creek at Madisonville. Currently, this site is forecasted to go right above or go right back up to minor flood stage. We did do some contingency forecasts just to kind of give you an idea of what you would need to kind of see to get you back up to moderate flood stage. So currently that minor forecast is reflective of 48 hours of the deterministic rainfall. You would need closer to about 4.5 inches to get that site back up to moderate flood stage. Since it is forecast to go back up to minor flood, I just wanted to point out from the inundation maps that we have that you would likely see some impacts similar to what you saw at the beginning of the flood event earlier this week, with some of the feeder roads being inundated near State Highway 75, as well as some potential structures being threatened downstream at FM 247. Working your way over to the Trinity at Riverside, basically the forecast has it on a slow fall, so a lot of the rainfall that we're currently forecasting in the 48-hour window is just going to kind of pad that recession. You would need probably closer to 3.5 to 4 inches to prolong the moderate flooding, but we don't expect to see another secondary rise there, so that would just prolong the impacts that you're currently seeing in that location. Again, we don't have an inundation map since it's upstream of the reservoir. So we talked about Lake Livingston currently releasing around the 81,000 CFS. That's what we're holding in the forecast. Looking directly downstream at Goodrich, we are currently seeing the river on a slow fall. We've just gone down into moderate flood stage. You would need probably closer to over 3 inches with additional releases from Lake Livingston to see a secondary rise or to see a slower prolonged recession here. So that's relatively good news as far as no additional, crazy rises downstream if there aren't any significant releases coming from Lake Livingston. I don't have a slide in here for Long King Creek, but I did want to point out that it's currently not forecast to go above action stage with the current rainfall in the 48-hour window. But you would need closer to about 4.5 inches in that basin to get you to minor flood at Long King Creek. Just looking at the flood inundation map, this is actually the current analysis flood inundation map for Goodrich. So this is where this is what we are expecting is flooded at this current moment. So this is not forecasted flooding. This is what we think is still happening. Since we're still seeing, we're on a slow fall, we're still expecting homes to be impacted just downstream of the reservoir, as well as some of those areas down by Holiday Lake, with mainly street flooding in that area at this time. Working your way downstream a little bit further, still looking at inundation in Horseshoe Lake, concerned with some of the homes in that area if they are not elevated. If they are elevated, still cut off at this time, as well as over by Lake Water Wheel. At Menard Creek at Rye, the forecast is still on a slow fall. We are anticipating a slight bump with some of the heavier rainfall as we go into the Friday timeframe. You would need probably closer to about 4 inches for that to get back up to moderate flood stage. So again, we just need to see where some of that heaviest rainfall sets up, but that's kind of what you would need to expect to see it jump back up into moderate flood. Trinity River at Romare, we're just seeing a slow fall on that recession. Again, you can see that the flood wave has moved past Romare now and is working its way downstream to Liberty. Again, this is very similar to Goodrich, where we would need 3+ inches plus additional releases from Lake Livingston to get a secondary rise at that location. We are anticipating, or we do currently see the potential for impacts remaining in the Romare area and just downstream, even though it is still only an action stage. So these are some areas that we need to figure out if the impacts are still valid, because if so, we might need to reevaluate the flood categories for those locations. And we pointed these out in the webinar yesterday. Some of those locations include County Road 2166, 2120, 2122, as well as downstream at County Road 2573, 2574, and 2900. And then there's also that subdivision near Cypress Lake Drive that need to be evaluated. So again, these areas are still being shown as inundated, mainly probably with street flooding, but there's the potential for structures being threatened, especially as the flood wave is currently making its way at these locations at this time. Looking at Liberty, we still are expecting the crest to get to Liberty within the next 24 to 48 hours. The crest is around 30.5 feet. I believe yesterday we had out 30.6 feet, so still staying pretty consistent there. With the rainfall being kind of more centered to the north of this location, we're currently just taking the flows that we've got upstream, routing those down, and that's just causing a slower recession, kind of keeping us around that 30.5 feet pretty much for the next 5 days. So not seeing much change there at Liberty. Looking at the potential impacts around Liberty, so this is just upstream. We mentioned this yesterday. The concern is mainly for the neighborhood of, or the community of Dayton Lakes. Those structures are elevated, but would be cut off, as well as there's the area down by County Road 644. Some of those areas, most likely the structures are elevated as well, but the roadways into those locations would be inundated. And then right around the gauge location, there is the potential for road flooding and structures being threatened just north of Highway 90 on the right bank. On the left bank, where that orange circle is, that is the levee protected area that we don't anticipate seeing any major impacts at this current level. However, we do anticipate potential roadway and structure floodings downstream in some of those locations. I will say this inundation map near Liberty does have a little bit more uncertainty with it as it's starting to kind of get into that coastal emission zone. So we don't want you to pay too close attention to the output outside of these circled areas. But we do welcome any feedback if you know of any flooding in these areas so that we can make improvements. And I should have mentioned this ahead of time, but a lot of these flood inundation maps, if you weren't on the call yesterday, these are experimental. We're using these to try to help better the improvement and of the output for these maps so that we can use them going forward. Some maps are going to be more reliable than others. And then the last site on Trinity River at Moss Bluff, still looking at minor flooding, kind of knocking on the door of moderate flooding, crest of around 14.9 feet, and that would be on the Saturday timeframe. And then any additional rainfall that falls upstream, we'll kind of have to update the forecast depending on what happens over the next 24 to 48 hours. One thing I did want to point out is yesterday we were highlighting the potential for flooding around the county roads that are listed on the screen. But there is another area that we did notice that could be inundated. Again, we mentioned that this is in the coastal emission zone, so we do have to take that with a grain of salt. But there are several areas just around the Moss Bluff gauge that could be potentially inundated, mainly worried about the roads in these locations given the flat terrain down there. Okay, shifting gears over to the San Jacinto. So I'm going to start off with Lake Creek, just downstream of Lake Conroe. So currently we are at minor flood stage, just right at minor flood. We do anticipate a slow recession as some of that rainfall starts to kind of funnel in. And then we expect a secondary rise closer to the Saturday timeframe that would pop us back up over minor flood stage. Now that's with the current 48 hours of forecasted rainfall. You would need to get closer to 5.5 inches in order for this site to pop up to about moderate flood stage. And so that's something that you would want to keep in mind. I did want to show the inundation map for this specific location. This is showing the 139. So right at minor flood, really there's not many impacts. I just wanted to kind of show that there is an inundation map available on the Inform website. That's the USGS webpage that I'll have linked at the very end. This inundation map does have depth, so you can go in there and be able to look at the different levels if we do have to increase the forecast closer to that moderate flood stage if we do start to see the heavier bands set up in this particular area. But again, you would need it closer to about 5 to 5.5 inches. That would get you closer to moderate flood stage and create additional impacts more than what's shown on this map. So for the East Fork of the San Jacinto River at Cleveland, the updated forecast shows it still on a slow fall as that rainfall kind of gets into the basin overnight time frame and into Friday time frame. We do anticipate a secondary rise that would be up to about 17.9 feet, so just under minor flood stage. This site we need to monitor pretty closely. So even though it is not currently forecast to reach minor flood stage, it is very sensitive to additional rainfall and runoff. So we are anticipating around 6 inches would get this site to pop up above minor flood, and it wouldn't take much more to get us up to the moderate flood stage. So I just want to make sure that even though we're not showing this site going above minor flood, there is the potential there, so just keep monitoring the rainfall. You'd probably need to get close to about 6 inches though to see it pop up. And if we do get that 6 inches, especially if it occurs in a shorter period of time, I would see us go above minor flood stage sooner than what's shown here. So this is only with 48 hours. If we see that 48 hours of forecasted rainfall, if we see that 6 inches within 24 or 48 hours, that crest would occur much sooner. So we'll keep an eye on that. There is the inundation map that is available on the Inform site to where you can look at that as this event is unfolding. So if you start to see that 6 inches come into fruition, you can jump onto the USGS website that I have linked at the end, and you can go in and look at these flood inundation maps to kind of see what could be potentially inundated and what the depth is at these locations. I did want to point out though, this is the flood inundation map at 19 feet, so that's flood stage. We are currently expecting it to be below this, but if you were to see 19 feet, the Wells Avenue area would be inundated, and the East Fork RV Park would not be inundated until around 19.5 feet. So hopefully that would help in any planning purposes. For New Caney, so we're currently still at major flood right now. We did crest at 70.07 feet, and we're on a slow fall. We're expecting it to continue to fall below moderate flood stage within the next 24 hours. However, depending on how much rainfall does fall in this area, you could see that recession prolonged. Now, this site is definitely more responsive to the routed flows from upstream. If we start to see routed flows from upstream and the additional rainfall, we could see us stay above moderate flood stage longer than that 24 to 48 hour time frame. We would anticipate a second rise into moderate flood stage sooner as well. Here's the inundation map for that site. So I wanted to show it since we're currently still at major flood stage. So we are expecting impacts that would be downstream of FM 1485. It's still inundated. We have the slab elevations on the right bank that are currently still experiencing inundation, as well as the potential for structures and roadway flooding on the left bank as well. And as you work downstream, since we're still only seeing that crest having occurred over the past 6 hours, past 6 to 12 hours, excuse me, we are anticipating continued flooding impacts further downstream. So the prolonged impacts down near River Terrace are still ongoing. For Peach Creek near Splendora, we currently have it forecast to reach minor flood stage going into Thursday into Friday timeframe, crest around 14.2 feet. That's with the 48 hours of forecasted rainfall. You would need closer to 5.5 to 6 inches to get this site to go up to moderate flood stage. I don't have the inundation map here since it's still forecasted to reach only minor flood stage, but again, you can access those from the resources that I've got at the end of the slide deck. And the same thing with Caney Creek as well. Still seeing only a forecast up to 15 feet, which is only action stage. You would need to get closer to 5.5 inches at that site to get you up to moderate flood stage. So definitely need to keep an eye on where some of those heavier rainfall bands will set up, like Tim was talking about. But for the 2 to 5 inches, that's definitely still manageable for several of the sites in the San Jacinto Basin. The last thing I want to end on for the San Jacinto, a lot of the West Fork is going to be highly contingent on where the heaviest rainfall falls. Currently, we're only anticipating rises to action stage for the West Fork. Which working all of that water downstream to Humble, we're expecting a rise to around 48.5 feet, 48.7 feet. And that crest would occur sometime going into Thursday night into Friday morning. And again, this is with the 48 hours of forecasted rainfall. We are going to have to monitor where that heaviest rainfall does set up to kind of see how that would impact the forecast down here in Humble. But again, currently looking at only action stage at Humble at this time. And then once you work through all of that through Lake Houston, of course, will be spilling. What comes in will come out, and that's what will be impacting down at Sheldon. Still only expect an action stage there as well. But depending on where the rainfall sets up, we could see the potential for getting up closer to minor flood stage, depending on how much rainfall falls in the West Fork Basin. The last thing, as I promised, I did wanted to bring up the Navasota River near Normandy. So I mentioned that we've got a lot of rises to action stage on the Brazos, but we do see minor flood stage being forecast at Normandy starting within the next 12 to 24 hours, seeing a rise of minor flood. And then that's going to just prolong for the next 5 days. And then this is with 48 hours of forecasted rainfall. If for some reason that heaviest rainfall stays up to the northern portion, there is the potential that we could see up closer to moderate flood stage. But right now, still only expecting minor flood.